Hello and welcome, my dear friend. The loudest regret doesn't scream. It sits quietly at shichta.m, replaying the moment someone chose convenience over character. Here's the part nobody likes to admit out loud. Betrayal rarely comes from hatred. It comes from weakness dressed up as confidence. People don't always leave because they found something better. Most times they leave because they found something easier, something shinier, something that claps for them, agrees with them, laughs a little too hard, and never asks them to grow up. There's an actual psychological fact behind this. Studies on decision show that when people are faced with growth versus comfort, the brain naturally leans toward what requires less emotional energy. Growth feels like work, comfort feels like relief, and relief is addictive. That's how people end up trading depth for decoration and calling it an upgrade. Spoiler alert, it never is. So when they walked away from you for a fake, it wasn't some grand calculated master move. It was an emotional shortcut, a clearance sale decision with a luxury brand ego. They mistook surface-level validation for alignment and thought they were winning. At first, it even felt like a win. New energy, new attention, new excitement. The kind of excitement that disappears right around the time reality shows up with no filter and no mercy. And let's be honest, the fake came with perks. No accountability, no depth, no uncomfortable self-reflection, just vibes, selfies, and a mutual agreement to ignore red flags like their motivational quotes. That's not connection, that's emotional fast food. Tastes good going down, leaves you feeling empty an hour later. Meanwhile, you weren't loud about the betrayal. You didn't audition for sympathy or start a podcast called Look What They Did to Me. You simply detached, elevated, and let time do what it always does best. Expose shortcuts. Because time is undefeated. Time doesn't argue, time doesn't explain, time just collects receipts. Now, here's where the regret enters quietly, awkwardly, and without permission. It shows up when the fake can't hold weight. When conversations feel thin, when loyalty is missing, when depth is replaced with performance, and suddenly the memory of you isn't nostalgic it's instructional. This isn't about revenge, this is about reality. They didn't betray you and win. They betrayed you and delayed their own growth, and the bill always comes due. No refunds, no exchanges, and definitely no store credit. Barring number one, they didn't choose the fake because it was better. They chose it because it was easier to control. This is the part that stings, not because it insults you, but because it exposes the truth behind the betrayal. People don't abandon real depth for something fake unless they feel threatened by what's real. You were not too much, you were too solid, too aware, too honest. Being around you required them to show up fully, and that level of presence scared them more than they were willing to admit. Baited control feels safe to people who are internally unstable. The fake didn't challenge their habits, didn't interrupt their patterns, didn't notice the cracks in their character. The fake agreed quickly, adapted fast, and never asked uncomfortable questions. That's not chemistry. That's convenience. And convenience is extremely attractive to someone who doesn't want to grow. With you, they couldn't hide. Your clarity quietly exposed their inconsistencies. Your standards reminded them of promises they never kept to themselves. You weren't policing them, you were simply existing with integrity. That alone felt like pressure. So instead of rising, they retreated to something they could manage, shape, and influence without resistance. They mistook control for peace. They thought choosing someone predictable meant choosing stability. But real stability doesn't come from control, it comes from inner alignment, and they didn't have that. So they chose an external solution to an internal problem. At first, it felt like a win for no friction, no accountability, No growth pains, just smooth interactions and surface-level comfort. But ease without substance always reveals its cost later. Over time, the fake stopped being impressive. The agreement started feeling empty. The control became boring. And boredom is where regret quietly takes root. Because here's the truth they eventually run into. Controlling someone doesn't make life easier, it makes it smaller. There's no expansion there, no depth, no real connection, just repetition and performance. And that's when your absence becomes loud. Not because you chased or explained, but because you represented something they couldn't dominate. Authenticity. Bullion, they didn't lose you because you were lacking. They lost you because they couldn't handle something that didn't bend to their comfort. Median number 2. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was strategic self-preservation. Most people think betrayal comes from hate, jealousy, or malice, but that's rarely the full story. In reality, the betrayal was about survival, theirs, not yours. You were operating on a level that demanded honesty, reflection, and courage. And simply being around you forced them to confront parts of themselves they weren't ready to face. That confrontation is uncomfortable, it's exhausting, it threatens their carefully curated version of who they think they are. So leaving you wasn't about hurting you, it was about protecting their fragile sense of self. You embodied clarity and integrity in ways they couldn't match. Every interaction with you reminded them of what they were avoiding within themselves. They didn't want to fight, and they didn't want growth. They wanted comfort, distraction, and emotional safety. Betraying you was a shortcut. It allowed them to maintain the illusion that they were okay, that they were winning, and that they didn't need to change. Choosing the fake gave them a way to survive emotionally without facing the cost of evolving. What makes this even harsher is that they probably justified it to themselves. They convinced themselves that your presence was demanding, that your expectations were too high, that loyalty was overrated. In their minds, they weren't abandoning truth. They were choosing sanity. But the reality is, they weren't choosing anything positive. They were choosing temporary relief at the expense of long-term clarity and real connection. Then now the weight of that choice sits on them. Regret doesn't hit immediately. It grows quietly as they realize the replacement can't offer the depth, consistency, or authenticity they abandoned. Every time they encounter a challenge, a genuine conversation, or a reflection of their own weaknesses, they remember what they left. That regret is brutal because it isn't about losing someone. It's about realizing they sabotaged themselves to preserve a false sense of comfort. In the end, their betrayal exposes only their limitations, not your worth. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. And mirrors by nature don't adjust to make people comfortable. They reveal what's true. Tendy number 3. They traded long-term substance for short-term validation. The harsh reality of their choice is that they didn't leave you for someone better. They left you for someone easier to admire. You offered depth, consistency, and the kind of connection that challenges people to grow. You represented patience, loyalty, and the unspoken understanding that real value takes time to appreciate. But they didn't want time. They didn't want to earn understanding or confront the parts of themselves that needed work. They wanted immediate gratification, applause, and the hollow thrill of feeling seen without ever being truly known. Short-term validation is addictive because it's simple. It requires no introspection, no accountability, and no sacrifice. The fake could smile, nod, and mirror exactly what they wanted to hear. No effort, no confrontation, no pressure to improve. They mistook that ease for superiority. They mistook surface-level attention for significance, and for a while it probably felt like winning. Danged. Meanwhile, substance, what you offered, demands patience and resilience. It requires people to show up honestly, to admit flaws, and to stay present even when things get uncomfortable. Substance is quiet but enduring. It builds momentum over time, shaping people into better versions of themselves. Benjus, they walked away from that not because it was lacking, but because they weren't ready for the weight of it. They weren't ready to be tested, challenged, or stretched beyond what felt safe. Eventually, the truth of their decision arrives with consequences they can't ignore. The applause fades. The shallow excitement evaporates. The fake can't hold the standards or depth that substance naturally carries, and that's when regret. But they start noticing the emptiness, the lack of loyalty, and the fact that everything they admired in the short term couldn't replicate what they abandoned in the long term. Their loss is brutal, but it's entirely their own making. They didn't just trade people. They traded opportunity, growth, and connection for convenience. And in doing so, they planted the seeds of their own regret, the kind that whispers quietly every day, reminding them that what lasts is never found in a moment, but in substance, consistency, and authenticity, exactly what they left behind. Number 4, they mistook your patience for replaceability. Patience is a silent power, but most people see it as weakness. They assumed that because you waited, because you gave space, because you didn't react with drama or desperation, that you could be taken for granted. They confused your calm presence with availability, your understanding with passivity, and your consistency with dispensability. What they failed to realize is that patience is not an unlimited resource. It's measured, deliberate, and guided by awareness. It isn't a free ticket to disrespect. It's a mirror that reflects how much people are willing to earn. They tested boundaries, assuming that your patience meant tolerance. They pushed, manipulated, and walked all over principles they hadn't the courage to uphold themselves. Assumed you'd remain. They reinforced the illusion that loyalty and integrity were optional for someone like you. But patience is quiet, not permanent. It watches, it waits, it allows clarity to emerge. And the moment they overstep beyond the invisible line, it's no longer patience, it's closure. What makes this even harsher is that they didn't realize your patience had a price: self-respect. They mistook the calm before the storm for weakness, never understanding that your restraint was a test of character, a gauge of who they truly were under pressure. The more they took for granted, the more they revealed themselves, not to you, but to time itself. Time, as always, doesn't lie. Time records every misstep, every assumption, and every moment they believed you would bend for them. Eventually, the realization hits them too late. The patience they assumed would last forever has expired. They find themselves staring at absence, trying to measure what they could have had, but never truly valued. The truth they cannot escape is that patience is not replaceable. Loyalty, integrity, and clarity cannot be duplicated by convenience or the fake they chose over you. They lost the rare kind of constancy that challenges, supports, and elevates all at once. And now regret sits in the empty spaces they once assumed you'd always fill, reminding them quietly and cruelly that patience is not permission. It's a privilege, and theirs has run out. Number 5, the fake mirrored who they wanted to be. You reflected who they actually were. This is the cruel twist that makes regret so sharp. The fake didn't challenge them. The fake agreed with every convenient version of themselves they wanted to believe in. They smiled at the parts they liked, laughed at the jokes they wanted to hear, and reinforced the illusions they. That kind of reflection feels safe because it never forces confrontation or growth. It's flattering, predictable, and harmless, exactly what they thought they needed. You, on the other hand, were dangerous to their comfort. You reflected truth, not ego. You mirrored honesty, consistency, and integrity, the parts of themselves they hadn't fully accepted or developed. Being around you meant looking in a mirror they weren't ready to face. You didn't bend or compromise to make them feel superior. You didn't applaud mediocrity or celebrate avoidance. Your presence held a subtle, unshakable challenge. Be real or be exposed. They mistook the fake for an upgrade, believing it was a better fit for their life. But the fake wasn't better, it was safer. It was easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to admire without accountability. In contrast, your presence demanded authenticity, and authenticity always makes people uncomfortable when they aren't aligned. The irony is that the fake's approval eventually loses its shine. It cannot sustain depth, handle complexity, or survive scrutiny. Meanwhile, the reflection you offered never dims. Even absent, your authenticity casts a shadow over every interaction they now have. They begin to notice the cracks in the illusion, the emptiness behind the smiles, the lack of challenge, and suddenly they remember what real alignment felt like and what they abandoned. Regret in this situation isn't about losing someone who loved them. It's about losing someone who forced them to confront themselves. They didn't just walk away from a person. They walked away from the opportunity to grow into the person they could have been. That realization is heavy, sharp, and unavoidable. And it's the kind of regret that lingers because no replacement can ever mirror truth the way you did. Number 6, their regret didn't arrive when they lost you. It arrived when the fake stopped pretending. Regret is rarely immediate. It doesn't knock on the door the moment someone leaves. It sneaks in quietly, often disguised as frustration or boredom. When they betrayed you, they probably felt victorious at first. They replaced depth with ease, substance with surface, and authenticity with a mirror that only reflected what they wanted to see. At the time, it probably felt like freedom. Freedom from accountability, growth, and the subtle pressure of being around someone who demanded presence and honesty. But here's the cruel irony. The fake can only pretend for so long. Masks crack, mirrors warp, and illusions eventually reveal their limitations. The excitement that initially felt like a thrill begins to fade. The easy validation starts to feel hollow. Conversations that were once effortless begin to expose gaps, inconsistencies, and the lack of real understanding. That's when reality bites. That's when they start noticing what they abandoned. They realize the fake cannot hold the standards, consistency, or depth that you naturally carried. They see how shallow the connection is, how fragile the loyalty is, and how little growth occurs in a space designed for comfort rather than truth. Lemgeared, the replacement they chose to escape effort and accountability, now becomes a constant reminder of what they truly lost. Not just you, but the integrity, clarity, and alignment that came effortlessly with your presence. This kind of regret is sharp, slow, and unavoidable. It creeps into quiet moments, late nights, and idle hours. When the fake's performance collapses under pressure every time they try to recreate what you offered, they fall short. Every moment reminds them that convenience cannot replace value, that imitation cannot match authenticity, and that shortcuts always collect interest in the form of regret. What they traded for ease now sits heavy on their conscience, a reminder that betrayal doesn't erase significance. The truth they ignored in the moment comes back amplified by absence, repetition, and the inevitable collapse of the fake's facade. Their victory was temporary, but the lesson you represented endures permanently. Number 7, they confused chemistry with alignment. This is where their biggest mistake hides in the illusion of excitement. Chemistry is loud, flashy, and addictive. It gives you butterflies, late-night texts, and the thrill of feeling seen. But chemistry alone cannot sustain a connection because it is temporary and surface level. Alignment, on the other hand, is quiet, steady, and often goes unnoticed until it is gone. Alignment is shared values, respect, mutual growth, and the kind of understanding that doesn't need constant validation. They walked away from you because they were chasing the noise of chemistry, mistaking it for depth. While what you offered required patience, discernment, and emotional investment, they mistook energy for compatibility. They assumed the excitement they felt in the moment was a sign that things were perfect, that the relationship could thrive without effort or maturity, that thrill blinded them to the subtle cues that only someone aligned could provide. Loyalty under pressure, clarity in conflict, and integrity that doesn't bend for convenience. Alignment isn't always glamorous or loud. It is consistent, reliable, and requires effort from both sides. Chemistry is effortless, but effortless often comes with emptiness. The fake could flirt, perform, and give temporary satisfaction, but it could never mirror the depth and consistency you offered. Alignment doesn't show itself in a weekend, a night out, or a shared laugh. It's revealed over years of interaction, under stress, through honesty, and in moments that test character. They abandoned that long-term treasure for the illusion of immediate gratification. Now, the consequences are unavoidable. The fake's excitement fades when challenges arise, and they realize too late that thrills cannot compensate for missing alignment. They notice the absence of patience, accountability, and shared vision, the qualities that you embodied without effort. That realization hits quietly but ruthlessly, leaving them with a hollow victory. They learned the hard way that chemistry can spark interest, but alignment builds legacy. What they mistook for the future was only a temporary high. And what they abandoned, your presence, your authenticity, your consistency, is the foundation no fake can ever replicate. Number 8, you represented stability they hadn't earned yet. Stability is not about predictability or routine. It's about consistency, integrity, and emotional maturity. It's about showing up even when it's uncomfortable, being steady in chaos, and staying aligned with your principles no matter what the moment demands. That's exactly what you offered. You weren't perfect, but you were grounded. You didn't bend for manipulation, perform for approval, or compromise your values to make someone else comfortable. That level of presence is rare, and most people aren't prepared to handle it. PMLE, they weren't ready for the weight of stability. They wanted excitement without responsibility, thrills without substance, and presence without accountability. Stability requires effort, reflection, and sometimes discomfort. Things they consistently avoided. Instead of rising to match the foundation you offered, they ran towards something easier. Someone who could mimic agreement and provide temporary pleasure without challenging them to grow. The fake didn't demand self-awareness, patience, or integrity. They didn't require the person to look inward, to reflect, or to confront their own weaknesses. In that sense, the fake was the only choice they could handle at the time. The tragic part for them is that stability cannot be replaced. You weren't just someone to spend time with. You were a benchmark. Every other interaction, every temporary relationship will now be measured against the quiet consistency you naturally embodied. The fake can smile, charm, and agree, but it can't mirror reliability under pressure. It can't hold the line when life challenges them, and eventually that realization becomes unavoidable. Mamdias. They walked away thinking the grass was greener, the path easier, the options simpler. But the truth is, stability is not a convenience to exploit. It's a standard that requires someone willing to rise to it. By leaving you, they abandoned not just a person, but the security of connection, the trust of loyalty, and the rare peace of knowing someone's presence is unwavering. When the fake fades and the temporary thrill disappears, they'll finally see what they were never ready to handle. That real stability is earned, not faked, and they lost it because they weren't willing to earn it. Number 9, they thought access to you was permanent. This is where their arrogance met reality. They assumed that your presence, patience, and loyalty were endless resources, that no matter what they did, you would always be there. They mistook your consistency for permanence, believing that time was on their side and that your availability didn't carry boundaries. Tulias, that was their first mistake, and it's the kind that leaves a mark that no amount of apology can erase. You were never theirs to control or take for granted. Every moment you offered, every ounce of energy you invested was a choice, not a given. Yet they acted as if the foundation of your presence was immovable, as if respect and integrity were optional luxuries rather than essential elements of connection. Tamsian, they assumed that betrayal, manipulation, or neglect could be corrected later, that consequences were distant and forgiveness automatic. They didn't realize that loyalty and respect have limits when met with repeated disregard. When they walked away for the fake, they believed they were upgrading, trading substance for ease, thinking they could return whenever it suited them. But you weren't a revolving door or a safety net. The moment clarity arrived, the rules changed. Access isn't permanent. And once they crossed the line, you didn't chase, explain, or negotiate. Your absence wasn't silent punishment. It was the natural consequence of them failing to recognize your value while they had it. The regret they now feel isn't about losing a person they can replace. It's about realizing the opportunity they thought infinite was finite. They are discovering that consistency, integrity, and authenticity are not commodities to exploit, but standards that once broken are rarely restored. And every day spent with the fake reminds them of what they left behind. Every fleeting smile or shallow interaction highlighting the absence of something they can't replicate. They underestimated your presence because they misunderstood its nature. Loyalty isn't automatic, patience isn't eternal, and integrity isn't negotiable. They thought access was permanent, and that illusion is now the source of their relentless regret. PMDA number, sure. The fake gave them permission to stay unhealed. One of the cruelest truths about betrayal is that it's often rooted in avoidance, not malice. They didn't leave you because you were lacking. They left because being with you demanded growth. You reflected clarity, honesty, and integrity. And simply being around you forced them to confront the parts of themselves they had been ignoring. That confrontation is uncomfortable. It requires introspection, accountability, and the courage to evolve. Most people aren't ready for that kind of pressure, and instead of rising to it, they ran. The fake offered a loophole. They found someone who mirrored their avoidance, someone who tolerated inconsistency, excuses, and emotional immaturity. They didn't have to grow, reflect, or face uncomfortable truths. They didn't have to confront bad habits, insecurities, or failures. Instead, the fake reinforced stagnation, normalized excuses, and applauded avoidance. In their mind, they were free. In reality, they were imprisoned by their unwillingness to confront themselves. This is why regret is inevitable. Growth delayed by avoidance is growth still owed. Every interaction with the fake eventually highlights what was missing. Accountability, authenticity, and every day spent with someone who merely mirrors desires without challenging character becomes a subtle reminder of the person they abandoned. You didn't just leave a void in their life. You left a reflection of what they avoided becoming. They traded the uncomfortable truth for easy comfort, thinking the shortcut would feel like victory. But shortcuts never replace real development. Life eventually demands balance. And every time they encounter a challenge, a conflict, or an emotional test, the lessons you embodied appear in stark contrast. The fake cannot replicate healing, insight, or resilience. They will realize too late that true connection pushes people forward, challenges them to evolve, and reflects their deepest potential. The very things they gave up in pursuit of temporary ease. Their regret isn't just about losing someone. It's about losing the mirror of their own evolution. They chose avoidance over growth. And the weight of that choice will follow them long after the fake has faded. You weren't optional growth. You were necessary evolution, and they walked away from it. Number CE. Their regret is quiet, private, and humiliating. Regret like this doesn't show up in grand gestures or public confessions. It doesn't make announcements or post-traumatic status updates. It lives in silence, tucked away in moments they can't control. Late nights, long drives, and the quiet hours when there's no one to impress. That's what makes it so brutal. They can't flaunt it, they can't admit it without exposing themselves. Every memory of what they lost sits like a weight on their chest. A private reminder of a decision they convinced themselves was clever, but was actually disastrous. The humiliation isn't just about losing you. It's about knowing they chose something lesser, easier, and fake over someone real, authentic, and irreplaceable. They betrayed depth for convenience, integrity for compliance, and substance for spectacle, and deep down, they know it. No amount of charm, excuses, or temporary distractions can erase that truth. They might laugh with others, pretend everything is fine, or act as if their choice didn't matter. But privately, they are confronted every day by the contrast between what they settled for and what they abandoned. It's a quiet, knowing realization that grows over time. The fake can't hold weight, the applause fades. The illusions crumble, and when reality hits, the truth they ignored becomes impossible to deny. They feel the sting not only because of what they lost, but because they recognize the power of what they discarded. Jans, you weren't just a person in their life, you were a standard, a mirror, and a presence that demanded authenticity and growth. The absence of that presence now humiliates them quietly as they watch their choices reveal their limitations. This kind of regret is relentless because it lives in reflection. Every thought of the past, every fleeting moment of longing reminds them that they walked away from something real for something fleeting. No one sees it, no one applauds it, and no one can fix it for them. It's a private punishment, a slow burning reminder that betrayal may feel clever in the moment, but wisdom always arrives eventually, and humility is always demanded, often in the most silent and humiliating way possible. Biendi and Numbashar. They now understand that loyalty can't be replaced, only recognized too late. Loyalty is rare, and it's not something you can fake or substitute. It's earned over time, proven in actions, and felt in moments when words aren't enough. You embodied loyalty without needing to announce it. You stayed consistent, honest, and present, even when others wavered or faltered. That kind of loyalty is invisible to the unready, often taken for granted and assumed to be permanent. Laying the moment they betrayed you for someone else, they were forced to discover the truth. Loyalty isn't a commodity you trade, and once it's broken, its absence is unmistakable. The fake they chose could never replicate loyalty. It can mimic attention, mimic excitement, mimic agreement, but it can't mirror the unwavering, dependable presence that you offered. Every word, every gesture, every quiet moment that once felt effortless with you now highlights what they forfeited. They begin to notice that the people around them can't be counted on the way you could. Trust is fragile, integrity is rare, and loyalty that's nearly extinct once they opt for convenience over commitment. Regret grows in those gaps. Every failure, every disappointment, every betrayal they encounter with the fake illuminates your consistency. They realize that loyalty isn't just staying around. It's choosing integrity, alignment, and truth when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain, and when convenience tempts. You didn't just offer company or affection. You offered reliability, authenticity, and a rare standard of care that now exists only in memory. They understand too late that loyalty cannot be recreated, bought, or replaced. It's only recognized in its absence, and by the time clarity arrives, the opportunity is gone. They cannot rewind the past or reconstruct the trust that was quietly given. Their regret isn't just about losing a person. It's about losing the rare assurance that someone had their back, believed in them without conditions, and demanded nothing less than truth. That realization is sharp, painful, and permanent. Loyalty is not replaceable, and they are learning this the hardest way possible. Number Susan, you became the standard they measure everyone against, whether they admit it or not. Once someone betrays depth for convenience, they inevitably realize the absence of true comparison. You didn't just leave a void in their life, you set a benchmark. Every interaction they now have, every conversation, every fleeting connection is measured consciously or unconsciously against what they abandoned. You represented clarity, integrity, and presence. And even though they tried to ignore it at first, time has a way of making these things undeniable. No matter how charming or flashy the replacement is, it cannot hold the weight, consistency, or authenticity that you naturally carried. People who choose convenience over substance often assume the replacement will be enough to distract them. It isn't. What they gain in ease, they lose in resonance. Every effort the fake makes is subtly, relentlessly compared to the quiet strength you brought. The alignment, the patience, the loyalty, and the ability to hold space. All the qualities they took for granted now act as the invisible ruler by which they judge everyone else. And the funny, painful truth is that they can't escape it. They may try to convince themselves the fake is better, easier, or more compatible, but internal comparison doesn't lie. And this is where regret sharpens its edge. The fake can entertain, flatter, and perform, but it cannot replicate the standard you embodied. Every moment of inconsistency, every lapse in integrity, and every sign of superficiality reminds them of what they abandoned. They are forced to confront a truth they wanted to ignore. No imitation can replace substance, and no shortcut can match presence. Being the standard means you are now the silent teacher in their life. They don't need reminders. Life itself, with every failure, every hollow connection, and every fleeting thrill, is proof of what they gave up. You didn't just leave, you left a template of excellence. And that template, invisible yet undeniable, ensures that no matter what they try to replace, the memory of your presence will forever define the level of authenticity, integrity, and loyalty they can aspire to, but never recreate. Number 6. Their regret isn't about losing you. It's about realizing they betrayed the only version of life that would have evolved them. What they walked away from wasn't just a person. It was a mirror, a challenge, and an opportunity all wrapped into one. Being with you demanded growth, self-reflection, and accountability, whether they liked it or not. Your presence wasn't about controlling them or forcing change. It was about holding space for evolution. The kind of evolution that transforms not just relationships, but entire lives. When they chose the fake, they didn't just abandon you. They abandoned the chance to become more, to face their own truths, and to rise to the level of life that you naturally inspired. That is why regret hits so differently in this situation. It doesn't scream immediately. It doesn't announce itself with drama. It creeps in slowly, quietly, as the fake begins to fail them. The shallow attention, easy agreement, and lack of challenge that seemed so appealing at first start to reveal their limitations. They realize the replacement cannot demand honesty, cannot reflect authenticity, cannot be forced, and it cannot compel someone to evolve. And that is the moment they finally grasp the weight of what they lost. Not just companionship, but the one connection capable of guiding them toward the person they were meant to become. Betrayal cuts deeper in every failed interaction, every brief thrill with the fake serves as a reminder of the depth they turned away from. They feel the heaviness of what could have been, the growth, the alignment, the clarity that came so naturally with you, and they realize it can never be recreated. But they didn't lose someone replaceable. They lost a rare, transformative presence that could have elevated their entire life. And the hardest part is this: they are fully aware of it. No amount of charm, excitement, or temporary distraction can erase that truth. They chose convenience over growth, imitation over authenticity, and surface over substance. Their regret isn't rooted in losing you. It's rooted in losing the life they might have become. Blamed every decision they made, every shortcut they took, every act of betrayal now circles back to one undeniable reality. They didn't just lose a person. They lost a benchmark, a mirror, and a presence that required honesty, growth, and integrity. They exchanged depth for ease, substance for appearance, and evolution for the illusion of comfort. Every late-night realization, every quiet moment of regret, every time they noticed the cracks in what they chose instead of you reflects the value they abandoned without ever fully understanding it. They walked away believing they were winning, convinced the fake could give them the comfort, excitement, or validation they desired. What they failed to realize is that what feels effortless rarely endures. The things that last are built quietly, consistently, and authentically, exactly what you brought. And time, as it always does, exposes the truth. The fake fades, illusions collapse, and reality moves in. Meanwhile, the presence you carried, your integrity, patience, loyalty, and alignment, continues to define the standard, subtly shaping their awareness and reminding them of what they gave up. The most painful realization they will ever face is this. Their regret isn't about losing someone they could replace. It's about losing the only version of life that could have transformed them. Every choice they make now is unconsciously compared to the rare depth, clarity, and authenticity they once had but chose to leave behind. And that kind of impact doesn't announce itself loudly or dramatically. It lives in the quiet, unavoidable truth that some losses are permanent, people are not interchangeable. So remember this, chosen ones, your worth is not determined by those who fail to recognize it in time. You are the mirror, the standard, and the presence that changes lives. And anyone who betrays that will eventually carry the full weight of their decisions. If this message resonates with you, subscribe so you never miss the truth about loyalty, growth, and authenticity. Like this to show your support. Share your thoughts so others can learn from your insight. And pass it on to someone who needs to be reminded of their power and value. This is more than content. It's a reminder of who you are and the impact you hold. Never let anyone forget it. God bless.